Captains of Industry, brought to you by Airtel.
Now, there was a time when experts would talk about the digital divide in Africa. These days, experts are talking about digital inclusivity. It's a recognition that the ICT revolution is well underway here in Africa. As African consumers demand better and faster services, both computer manufacturers and cell phone providers need to make sure that they're ready to take on the challenge. The US giant Dell is now bracing itself for the new African consumer. It's said to be an aggressive strategy. Stewart van Graan is the managing director of Dell South Africa. He's also the head of Dell across Africa. He's our captain of industry tonight. Stewart van Graan, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, after many years leading Dell South Africa and effectively starting the company in South Africa, the focus and the emphasis now is on Dell in the rest of Africa. How do you respond when people say to you, ooh, Africa's not for sissies?
Well, I'm an African, first of all, and I think that's very, very important. Certainly, South Africa is seen as one of the springboards into a lot of things that we can do in Africa. Africa is interesting in that it's not a country, it's 54 countries, as you know, and as such, has a makeup of a number of different facets in terms of how one goes to business in these different countries. Over 2,000 languages spoken, 930, almost a billion people. Lots of opportunity if one looks at Africa and really starts to take advantage of, if you will, leapfrogging Africa into the digital world.
So you're bullish and you're optimistic, but are there any things that you think to yourself, I shouldn't be naive about?
I don't think we should be naive about the challenges within Africa. I think the type of investment that we're seeing in Africa around infrastructure related to the internet is going to be huge in terms of trying to bridge the digital divide that you mentioned earlier. For us, Africa is untapped. I think for global the world, Africa is untapped, and as Dell, we're positioning ourselves to play a part in building Africa and ensuring that Africa takes its place in the economic world.
I mean, obviously, you mentioned the statistics, the demographics of almost 1 billion people across 54 African states, but the middle class in Africa is still relatively small. 165 million people who earn over $1,000 US per annum. Yes, it offers some sort of an opportunity. What's your strategy to tap into that middle class? Because effectively, that's where you need to begin.
Yeah. Loretta, the way I look at Africa is I look at the youth. Almost 50% of that billion people are the youth. And quite frankly, that's where I think the exciting time is for Africa in terms of its springboarding into the digital world. I think the investments that we're having and we're seeing through communications, the undersea cables, providing low-cost, high-speed internet, putting the power of information in the hands of the youth, I think will just unleash the full potential of Africa, and that's really what excites us about Africa.
Okay, some would say, okay, the youth obviously are the future of Africa, that's philosophy. The youth obviously very interested in being part of this digital space through their mobile phones, through their computers. But that's where it becomes challenging, because when you look at the extent to which the cell phone has revolutionized ICT on the African continent, particularly for the rural population, it raises questions as to whether or not the PC is redundant in the African space.
Well, I think there's an interesting phenomena happening with regards to what I call access to information. I think the device provides huge opportunity for many different devices to be put in the hands of our youth. So whether you're talking about a cell phone as it is today, and by the way, the cell phone is something that leapfrogged, if you will, sort of standard telecommunications as we knew it in South Africa. And that's a good example of how technology has really done very well in Africa. But whether you're talking about cell phones or tablets or PCs or notebooks or whatever, all these different access devices are going to be quite important based on the usage of individuals in terms of how they want to access or create data. And so for us, we don't think it's the death of any one particular device. We think there's a plethora of devices that will just add to all the different ways in which you could access information.
The economics, though, Stewart, let's be honest about it. I mean, if you're talking about a tablet or an iPad, it's an expensive device. And we're talking about youth not necessarily being high-income earners on the continent, on a continent where there's just 160 million people who constitute the middle class. So, you may produce products that are relevant to the 21st century, but not cost-effective.
Well, so let me go back to Dell. I think one of the key contributions of Dell to the IT industry has been affordable computing. I think we've always been on that particular line, and it's something that we will continue to be on. I think everybody understands that access devices have to be affordable to be put in the hands of many, many people who probably can't afford it. And so I think you will start to see technology becoming more and more affordable, but more importantly, being able to operate in the same way that you would have them operate anywhere in the globe.
What does affordability mean? I mean, when we speak to some ICT providers, particularly the cell phone manufacturers, especially as they introduce more products, there's the whole element of, should you partly subsidize the device as part of a CSI element of the work that you do, maybe? Yeah,
I mean, that could be one element of it, but I think what we're talking about is we're talking about an upliftment of Africa economically. I think with investment that will be coming in, with education of our youth, with jobs being created, I think that raises this middle class that you talk about, just in terms of the volume. So I think that's a natural thing that will happen with investment. For us, for sure, today, one would have to combine government type programs with business, input and CSI type initiatives that start to bridge that gap and make handsets and devices that are affordable.
I mean, obviously now everybody's now emphasizing the importance of data for education, data for connectivity, data for making Africa part of the global cosmopolitan environment. Is that the game changer, or is there another game changer?
Well, I tend to think of data as information. I think information in the hands of people is pretty powerful. So what are we talking about? We're talking about leveling the playing field. So, somebody in Kenya being able to access the same information that somebody in the US and the UK has access to, or using technology to help a doctor in Rwanda with an intricate operation through some, telemedicine type connection. There are a bunch of applications that are coming to the fore that start to, if you will, bridge the first and the third world. And I think, that's what we're beginning to see as the exciting part of technology. And certainly Dell is involved in that type of thing.
China is now one of the biggest investors in Africa, certainly the #1 trading partner of newly emerging African states. And with that comes a plethora of Chinese goods, cheap, manufactured electronics. Does that frighten you?
Not really. I think the world is global. The truth of the matter is that we too operate in parts of the world where it is advantageous and economic for us to manufacture our goods, and so certainly we participate in those same sort of business environments that you reference. For us, again, competition is always good. I think, again, the global environment demands that first world countries, as they've come to be known, start to invest more and more into Africa. And for us, China is just an example. But more importantly, what we do think is important is that the devices and the access to technology unleashes potential. That's the huge thing. And therefore, it is not just about the information that you talk about, but more as importantly, the application of that information to have a better life for all.
So basically, you're not concerned about competition from Chinese manufactured goods?
No, I don't believe that's a major thing. I really don't.
Let's talk about manufacturing, because you look at South Africa, for instance, and we know that it constitutes 1/5 of our GDP. We know that this is not where this country has a competitive advantage, and where we are facing threats from exports coming in from Asia. We know that we've got a jobs crisis, and that's where we need to leverage the creation of jobs. Similar things can be said about some of the frontier markets in Africa. We need to industrialize. We need to be creating those manufacturing industries. Where would Dell be part of the solution in this respect?
Well, I mean, what springs to mind, in your comment there, which is valid, Lerato, is the beneficiation, the whole sort of process, or taking raw materials and getting it to the end state. For a long time, manufacturing has been cited around the world based on the economics, labor, laws, all the standard stuff that I think, we look at. For me, though, and this was my particular stance in South Africa as well, is I'd sooner invest in the skills of people I'd soon invest in call centers, something that allows us to, if you will, elevate ourselves to our heads as opposed to always just the hands. Hands are important in terms of manufacturing, but it is about stimulating the minds. I mean, after all, we are in the technology field, information technology field. That's obviously, you know, something that that I'm quite keen about. So yes, we would invest in those sort of things around Africa.
So then, as part of your work, would you be exporting some of the human development elements of the work that Dell South Africa is doing, like Bono, for instance, where you're getting teachers and students to come into a controlled environment to learn a little bit more about technology? You've invested over 3 million in that respect. Are you going to do similar things?
Absolutely right. And so that's the type of conscience, social conscience, that I talk about within the organization. So for us, for sure, we believe that education is vital. We believe that, you know, putting technology in the hands of our children, and more importantly, you know, getting our teachers over the fear factor, if you will, of that technology is a very, very important thing. And Bono is a great sort of hub to, you know, to help along that space. For sure, that type of thing has to happen in Nigeria, it has to happen in Morocco, has to happen in Kenya. And so certainly we would see that type of thing happens more often.
Not challenging regulatory environments. We've seen it certainly in the telecommunications space, where cheap tariffs are now being used as a way to leverage greater market share. Are those sorts of things pervasive within the PC manufacturing and distribution side?
Well, you know, I think South Africa was one of the first to you know, lessen that sort of load, if you will, and make it a lot easier for us to import and bring technology in. I think that type of thing will open. You know, that's legislation that I think will be on the table of many governments within the African continent, and I think it's a known fact that as soon as those sort of barriers are to doing business are reduced, if you will, that it does spawn quite a burst in the economy.
I mean, the reason I'm asking is because obviously you've got to change tack when you're entering new African markets, and there's already talk about how in South Africa, for instance, your model is direct selling and distribution. In the rest of the continent, that might not be the best strategy. So are you going to be using local retailers? What's your tactic?
So our strategy outside of South Africa is very definitely channel-based, channel-centric, and that means that we're taking intellectual power, horsepower, if you will, into our channel partners and providing to them a similar sort of skill set that we would have as if we went direct. So investing in our partners is a huge part of where we're at. And so obviously everything's very, very local, and that's our key strategy in Africa.
Prior to joining Dell, you worked for IBM in the United States. You were the head of the software division. You were also their head of global business. It's the software element I want to focus on. The Minister of Technology in South Africa has lamented the fact that we're not seeing enough local ideas being patented. We're seeing people taking their grand inventions, registering them abroad, and not bringing back the investment, the skill, the dynamism of tapping into that idea back home. What do you see as a limitation in Africa? Because I think Mark Shuttleworth is probably the only real example of the most vibrant, dynamic software developer who then made a great profit out of it. We need to see more. Yes,
no, and totally agree with you. I think for sure, when you look at software, and specifically software development and applications that you spawn of various you know, databases or operating environments, I think South Africa is starting to come to the fore on that. Certainly, I just met with somebody earlier today who was talking to me about a software application that they've got that will help. You know, it's very similar to sort of a chat across a cell phone, or you know, so those sort of things are starting to come to the fore. I think what is one of the gating factors on that is really funding. And then the ability to go out and market and sell these things. I think that to me would be something that I would add to the portfolio of, I think, a very rich heritage that we've got in South Africa in terms of application development. So it certainly would be about the marketing and the sales that I would say.
Without really putting you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot. I mean, if this is an area of your work, your passion, then what are you doing together with a lot of your peers, for developing things like an African Silicon Valley, an ICT hub where ideas are generated and venture capitalists can come in and fund those ideas, and we see small but very relevant software development initiatives arising that address African problems.
Yeah, you know, the key thing for me is about coordination. I think there are many powerful multinationals and local companies in South Africa and Africa that if we sat around the table and put our heads to this is something that could be a reality. I really do believe that.
All right, we keep on talking to Stewart van Graan, who's the Managing Director of Dell South Africa and now heading up Dell in the rest of Africa. Not just about the digital divide and addressing some of these challenges in ICT, about a very interesting rags to riches story that's brought him to this point. Stay with us, you're watching Captains of Industry.